check out my old classroom.
Oh my god, I would love to.
Hopefully I still remember where it is.
Hello, my name is Thomas Schutenhill, and I'm the Artistic Director at Network for New Music. Today we're at the Germantown branch of the Cerulean Music School, and I'm with Cerulean Payne-Passmore. Their piece, The Forest Inside You, is going to be featured on our December 7th concert, which will happen at 7:30 here at the Germantown branch of Cerulean Music School. I thought we'd have this conversation in Cerulean because this is a special place for you. So welcome back, and thanks for being with me today.
Of course, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your background with this branch of the Cerulean Music School.
So I took piano lessons here from probably 2001 through 2006, so in my middle school and high school years. And I remember my piano studio that I was in, and I remember maybe not so fondly the hall that the piece will be performed in as the place where I did my piano juries and piano recitals.
So did you think of yourself at that time as a pianist, or did you already know you might also have that composer impulse?
Yeah, well, I had started making up music, and I knew what composers were, but I wasn't writing things down. I was making things up on the piano for myself, and occasionally playing pieces in ways that I felt were better than they were written down.
That's really interesting, because that's really about like using an imagination in approaching music, because we think of music, we think of certainly classical music as being a strictly written tradition, but it sounds like from an early stage you didn't necessarily conform to that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I hadn't really thought of it that way. That didn't last for very long, though. I think actually as I grew up and continued studying piano, I started to try to play the way I was supposed to play, and got more and more stressed out doing that.
And because getting to know your music, you seem to embrace the idea that there's a whole lot of music that happens that isn't prescribed.
Yeah, more and more I've tried to lean into what people create in the moment together and use my score to support and facilitate that process by giving options, giving goals, and providing a framework, but really letting the individual musicians bring as much of themselves as possible, even to the extent that I may change the score depending on who I get to work with.
Yeah. And what I'm also learning about your output as a composer is you talked about your early training as a pianist. The works that attract me the most are the vocal pieces. So how did the vocal component, when did the vocal component come in, and how has that manifested itself since?
Yeah, well, as you asked me, I'm now realizing that I was writing little songs for myself. And then I joined a choir here in Philadelphia, the Temple Children's Choir. I actually got to perform in Who Fields the Long Bright, which was probably one of the highlights of getting to be exposed to new music. But as I grew up, I think I became quite self-conscious of my voice, both because my voice doesn't really socially represent who I am, right? As a trans composer, there's this added layer of how much can I show up speaking and be perceived as who I am. And some of it was, again, do I really want to be perceived at all? Or can I just be a composer and be very safe over here and let others bring my work to life?
I want to explore that theme more. Before I do, I'm curious about some of your previous vocal music, of which you seem to have been written for singers of a traditional sense.
I actually don't have so many pieces that are written for other voices. I got to write for Esteli Gomez, who's a member of the film team, a wonderful collaborator through my master's program. But up until a few years ago, I hadn't really written that much for The Voice, and I decided to start writing for my own voice as a way of taking greater creative risks and really trying to create musical spaces where I could bring my whole self to the piece, because I think that for an audience, there's a special kind of connection that they can experience when they see a composer embody their own work, and I wanted to give people that experience.
Did your study of folk polyphony on your Fulbright, did that contribute in any way to this?
I think that it contributed more to my harmonic language. They just have one of the most fascinating and most dissonant vocal traditions.
So when you say they, could you tell us
Yeah.
where you studied and what you were studying?
So I did a Fulbright to the Republic of Georgia for a year after college, and I wanted to study the tradition of vocal polyphony, which is special because it's one of the oldest traditions, even predating Western European traditions and counterpoint, of having independent, moving voices to have up to 4 or even 5 parts. And there's a degree of improvisation, so you have an improvised framework moving through a certain text. It could be folk, it could be religious. And I was just so attracted to both the complexity, the spontaneity, and the use of harmony.
Is this a written tradition or an oral?
It's been written down now, but there are problems with transcribing it, like intonation. And also, the people who do it regularly and are not necessarily performing it around the world, they might not do it the same way every time.
Mm-hmm. Now you truly are bringing yourself to the piece and the concert, because the force inside you will feature you as the vocalist and the vocal component. So tell me more about how those come together.
I think for me, so I actually wrote this piece not for myself to be the vocalist, but for Charlotte Mundy as part of the talk ensemble. And I got to write this piece for them, but I was thinking about how would I create space for myself, and what kind of creative space do I want to present performers who can really literally do anything. What kind of virtuosity can I ask for? What kind of virtuosity would be interesting to ask for if I am starting to realize that I'm maybe not interested in excellence or perfection or even precision in particular?
Yeah, and I think that component of virtuosity is a particular kind of expression. There is another expression that can come out of a composer representing their music and also themselves, placing them in a very vulnerable place by being on stage and playing the music. So tell us a little bit about that, and I'm interested in that because what I want to do, what I'm interested in doing, is empowering other composers and creatives to occupy that space. So how can we, together in this concert, inspire others to do this? What brought you to this point?
I think it was during the pandemic when I was thinking about what are my values as a human being that I wish to see in the world, and really asked myself if I felt like my music was doing that. And I found that when I followed what my values are, in particular, trying to figure out what is an effective way to work with groups of people and to really lean into collective power, what kind of music would that look like? And my question was, if I wrote that, would I feel comfortable with it? And the answer was very much yes. If I aligned my values with my musical practice, then my voice naturally has a place, and I don't really experience the kind of fear that I would have trying to perform an art song, which has a history of right and wrong ways of doing it.
Thank you for that insight. A little bit of background to the piece. Could you tell us when you started working on this piece? Tell us a little bit about the creative process for The Forest Inside You.
Yeah, so I was really lucky to be able to workshop this with the talk ensemble. I think it was 2022 to 23. And usually, I think it's still quite the norm for composers. You basically are handed an ensemble, or you go find an ensemble, and you write the score, and you hand them the score, and then they try to do it the way that you want. And I'm not a huge fan of that process because I don't think that it has the level of collaboration that I find meaningful. And so I was able to start from a place of improvisation with the performers to set up my electronics and say, could you make a sound a little bit like this? So I might give them a melody. And I would just ask, what are your favorite sounds that you would like to share? This is the vibe I'm going for. I took those, I generated more material around those, and I got to workshop it again with them. And so the final score is really a product of things they were interested in doing or particularly good at, and the story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah, and I think in some ways you're almost empowering the musicians to be the co-creators
I hope so, yeah.
in this. And I think this is really important, that we're sort of entering into a new phase of collaboration, a level of collaboration between musicians and composers. And I find that incredibly exciting to be around.
Me too. I started thinking about that after living in a student housing cooperative for a couple years, which was essentially a commune. It was essentially an urban commune, and we had no landlord. We had no one setting the rules except for ourselves. We wrote our own policies. I was the person who collected and set the rent and the budget. With no experience, I was responsible for a 6-figure budget. With no experience, we had a board of directors of mostly late teens, so undergraduates. And this organization had survived for more than 90 years based on people fulfilling capacities that they weren't trained for. And what it really taught me is that if you bring a group of people together who have a shared vision and want the same things and are vulnerable together, they can achieve really complex tasks and they can do them really well. And so I wanted to think about what that means as musicians. What are the capacities that we have innately that we don't always tap into? And I think for sure every musician is a composer. Every audience member is a composer, and they are composing their own listening of every single piece they hear. And so I want to draw that out and let people experience their full creativity as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that idea because what it means is we're working together towards something really important. You know, the embodiment of the music, of the performance, and something really magical can happen in that kind of mix. Now, I want to think about this piece in particular because the vocal part doesn't have any words to it. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the wordless vocal part.
I think I just didn't feel that there were any particular words that needed to be said. And I have my own, like each movement taps into a very specific thing for me, but I want to allow the listener to have their own interpretation of those.
And the listener extends to the musician, doesn't it?
Sure,
because in the score you write echo.
Yeah, so they are listening to, everyone is being processed with, so the microphone picks up what they're playing, it goes to my computer has some algorithms that generate echoes at transpositions and delays, and then puts those out. But the pattern is set from the beginning, so it's always the same, so the musicians will hear, this is the sort of fabric that will be woven from this melody, and so they can start to become weavers of the fabric, both their own particular life and collaboratively with others. And part of that is that they, too, are also echoing the melodies of other musicians at particular times.
As I was listening to some of your back catalog, I discovered Burnt Norton, which also has this element of echo as a concept.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did the seeds of the forest inside you, was that planted then? Did it slowly?
Maybe. Yeah, I think Burnt Norton, I was really attracted to the poem because, again, it's this topic of something inside of us being a physical space that we can explore and move through and discover unknown parts of ourselves. I love that metaphor in the text. But I actually hadn't thought about the echoes. I have to really think about that, yeah.
I really enjoy the Eliot poem, the T.S. Eliot poem, and it sort of lives with me too, and like this idea of memory and echo, and I hear those lines all the time. Space, tell me, we're going to be in settlement music as a space, and that has a lot of memory for you, and the space of the concert hall that we'll be in can be a resonator too. How are we going to be using the space to help bring out your creative vision?
Well, from what I've heard, we have quadraphonic sounds, we have 4 speakers. I've heard that it will be in the round, which I'm very excited about. So the speakers will be on the outside surrounding the audience, which means they'll be fully immersed in the echoes that the performers are creating. For me, it's really interesting being in this space because many years ago, it was a space that I didn't really have very positive associations with. And so I actually had never returned to this space until the concert, Network for New Music's last concert. And I was just feeling a lot of complex things because now I'm coming back to this space as a teacher of music and seeing just the kids running around, remembering what it was like to be there, and also thinking a lot about how I want to teach music and use the educational music space as sort of a world-building space, a way of creating a different kind of world than the one that we live in today, and really trying to create a little bubble where my values maybe start to override some of the things that I don't value so much in the modern